I was the director of the Wade Center for 19 years. The Wade Center is a special collection archive of 7 British authors: G.K. Chesterton, George MacDonald, Charles Williams, J.R.R. Tolkien, Dorothy Sayers, Owen Barfield, and C.S. Lewis, the most comprehensive collections in the world. So I've spoken on Tolkien and Lewis, especially all around the world, and often I ask them the same question, the audience. How many of you have ever wanted to live in Middle-earth or Narnia? Now, I follow up the question the same way. I say, why? What is it about those worlds that makes you want to live in them? Now, we don't have a lot of time. I'll just say that slowly some responses come, and then I say, where do you think Tolkien and Lewis got all that stuff? Do you think they just made it up? They got it from right here, from the primary world, the world we live in. They were just looking at it with different eyes. They interpreted it in a way that is typically different than the way most people look at our life. They looked at it through a mythic lens. They looked at it, as Dorothy Sayers would say, as the greatest drama that ever staggered the imagination of man. Tolkien, writing to his son, and his son had kind of was talking about the whole creation account, the whole Genesis account. And this is early in the 20th century, when basically the Genesis account had been completely discredited. And he says, as for Eden, I think most Christians accept the very simple, that is, most Christians accept the very simple, and the uneducated, or those protected on other ways, have rather been bustled and hustled now for some generations by the self-styled scientists. And they sort of have tucked Genesis into a lumber room of their own mind as not very fashionable furniture. A bit ashamed to have it about the house, don't you know, when the bright, clever young people call? Those who think it's nonsense. I mean, of course, even the fidelious, that is, even the faithful, who did not sell it secondhand or burn it as soon as modern taste began to sneer. But in consequence, they have indeed myself as much, Tolkien says, as any, as you say, have forgotten the beauty of the matter, even as a story. Lewis recently wrote a most interesting essay, and here he's talking about C.S. Lewis, showing of what great value the story value was as mental nourishment of the whole Christian story, New Testament especially. And he's referring to this essay, which I quoted from earlier this morning, called Myth Became Fact. It was a defense of that kind of attitude which we tend to sneer at. The faint-hearted that loses faith but clings at least to the beauty of the stories having some permanent value. In other words, those who in a sense been bustled and can't keep it as something real, but still go back to it as something of beauty. At least those people get nourishment from it. Those who have been bustled out of the beauty of it don't get anything from it. And he goes on. His point was that they do still in that way get some nourishment and are not cut off wholly from the sap of life. For the beauty of the story will not necessarily guarantee of its truth, and it is not a guarantee of its truth as a concomitant. And the fidelius is meant to draw nourishment from the beauty as well as from the truth. We're supposed to get both. But partly as a development of my own thought on my own lines, technical and literary, partly in contact with C.S. Lewis, and in various ways, not the least, the firm guiding hand of Alma Mater Ecclesia, the church, I do not now feel either ashamed or dubious on the Eden myth. It is not, of course, historicity of the same kind as the New Testament, which are virtually contemporary documents, while Genesis is separated by we do not know how many sad exiled generations from the fall. But certainly there was an Eden on this very unhappy earth. We all long for it, and we are constantly glimpsing it, our whole nature at its best and least corrupted, its gentlest and most humane, is still soaked with a sense of exile. As far as we can go back, the nobler part of the human mind is filled with the thoughts of Sib, peace and goodwill, and with the thought of its loss. This is Tolkien thinking about what we call the Eden myth. And this morning, I unpacked, using Chesterton and Tolkien and Lewis, the idea that they viewed Genesis 1 through 11 as myth, but not in the sense of false, but myth in a literary genre sense. That body of literature that addresses the big questions of life. Why are we here? What is our meaning and our purpose? What relationship do we have with God? All of those big questions. And you have those mythic accounts all through the early Near East, Ugaritic, Sumerian, Babylonian, Egyptian, Hittite. And you also have the Christian myth, the Christian account of these things. And just as those accounts ordered the lives of the people who lived under them, the reason they got up, the reason they went about their business, the reason the way they dealt with the dead and everything else, was defined by these myths. Now I want us to take us to Genesis, and I want us to look at it from this perspective. Genesis is not a scientific account of the origin of things. And when we impose that paradigm on it, we lose its beauty and we lose its truth. It is a theological account. And if you look at it canonically, this account was given to Moses and the people of Israel at the time of Sinai. And it was given to a nation of people that were idolaters, first-rate idolaters. When Moses tarries on the mountain, what do? Do they go back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? No, they build a golden calf. They are steeped in Near Eastern religious idolatry. And God has to rewrite the record. And so the first 3 chapters of Genesis, in a very simple way, not a simplistic way, but a simple way, address 3 questions. Who is God? Who are we? And what is the meaning for our existence? And why are we having such a hard time? Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Who is God? God is the one who created all things and ordered all things. And what is clear from Genesis 1 is that he created because he wanted to, simply because he wanted to. You go to any other mythic account of creation, and I've tried to read as many as I can, there's always some coercion in it. There's either conflict among the gods, and in one case, the slain body of one god is used as the material you used to create the physical elements of creation. Or we were created for the purpose of giving the gods rest, because they were just tired and they needed some lackeys. And there's an inherent dualism there in terms of good and evil. But you come to Genesis, and in the first chapter it says God, and this God creates out of his bounty because he wants to. He's not coerced. He hasn't an arm behind his back. You see? And what he creates then has dignity that no other creation account gives. Because it's not coerced, you see? It has dignity because God wanted to create it. And it's poetic in its structure, that first chapter. Hebrew poetry isn't rhyming, it's repetition and parallelism. So God said, let there be, let there be, let there be. There was light, there was this. You see? Day 1, day 2, day 3. And he begins to create things after his own kind. Create things that are able to reproduce after their own kind. And that's as it moves down. But then he comes and he says, now, all this is set up. I'm going to create something after my own kind, in my image, in my likeness. And I'm going to give this thing to them. And they're going to rule over it like I would rule over it, because they're stamped with my image and my likeness. You see that? That's who God is, and that's what he has created. And then we come to Genesis 2, and we sort of hunker down. And he's already said that he created in his image and his likeness, male and female created he them. So when you come to Genesis 2, the narrative is this way. Basically, you have this garden, and he comes down and he grabs literally the clods of dirt, and he yatsars. Okay? If you were here a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Trevor Hart, he used this word. It's a word that is full of artistic intent. It's like a potter shaping a pot. And the important thing here for us to grasp is not how long it took. The important thing is God's hands are all over us. It doesn't matter if he did it in a moment or 2 billion years at this point. You see from the context, the important thing is God shaped this. He yatsared it. There's an intimacy in that relationship. And once he's done it, unlike anything else in creation, he immediately imparts the breath of life. Do you see that? In fact, the word is ruach. It's the word used for spirit, wind, breath. The Greek term would be pneuma, the same way. So what it is God breathes into this yatsared thing, and Adam becomes a living being. In his physical entity, he is one with the earth. He's part of the very thing he's going to rule over. But the life principle in him has come immediately from God, and so he has this relationship with God as well. Do you see that? And the guy who's without sin. What more can this guy need? He's got God, he's got creation. And then you have this arresting in the middle of chapter 2, this arresting, it's not good. Have you ever wondered why that, you got good, very good in chapter 1, and then all of a sudden you got this arresting not good. What is not good? Tell me. He's alone. And what do you mean he's alone? He's got God. He's got all these animals hanging around him. He's alone because what? He doesn't have one who literally corresponds to him. Because he's made in the image and likeness of God, and as we understand and can read this back in, God is an essential unity with this incredible diversity. And he's creating us in his image and his likeness. So, if you read in the narrative, it says, it's not good for man to be alone. And then all of a sudden, Adam goes out and he names the animals, right? And when he gets done naming the animals, what does he realize? He's alone. Do you see that movement in the narrative? God says it's not good for man to be alone. Adam doesn't have any conception of aloneness at this point. How would he? So he goes out and he names the animals, and all of a sudden he sees they're all paired up. And then he goes, oh, wow, something's missing here. I ain't got nobody. They got somebody, I ain't got nobody. Do you see? I sometimes wonder if it's like a psychological ploy. Now he's got Adam where he wants him. Now it's very interesting what happens next. God does not go back and he doesn't yatsar a guy. But he doesn't go back and yatsar a woman either. He doesn't do either one of those. Because he's creating something after his own image and his own likeness, it must mean then that this one who's going to correspond with him must be ontologically one with him. Ontology means nature of being, right? So this unbroken, essential unity. Well, it's all there, right? Everything God's yatsared and the very principle of life is in Adam. And note the narrative then. What does God do? He goes, he puts Adam to sleep, he takes from Adam, because it's all there, and now he doesn't yatsar. The Hebrew word is banah. He rebuilds Adam. That's what it means. Rebuilds him, essentially one with him, and yet uniquely different. And when Adam wakes up and he lays eyes on this creature, he doesn't say pig, duck, chicken, cow. He says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. This is the one who completes me. Do you see that? And so what you have here, try to picture in your mind what God is creating. He has Father, Son, Holy Spirit. This God who is Father, Son, Holy Spirit then goes down and he yatsars ish in the Hebrew. And he breathes into him the breath of life, and then he takes a bit of him, rebuilds him, and he makes Isha. And Isha is one with the earth because it comes from Adam, and one with the Creator. Do you see that triadic pattern? God, Ish, Isha. And Ish and Isha now are given this thing to rule over. You have this other thing. God, because of who he is, this essential unity with this incredible diversity, hates sameness. He's not about sameness. He's about relationship. And he embodied in Adam and Eve genetically this kaleidoscope of humanity. Do you see that? It was all right there, all of the potential of it. In the Garden of Eden, you didn't have all the trees that are here, all the flowers that are here, but in that garden was genetically loaded. God is not stingy. And if you can sort of get your imagination here and say, okay, let's say the fall doesn't happen. And it says, be fruitful and multiply. And all of a sudden they start multiplying. And you've got all these other diverse things that are essentially one. And they outgrow the space. It's a finite space. Remember when they're kicked out of the garden? It's uncultivated. It's wild. But you got 4 rivers running out of it. So you can imagine what would happen is they just start taking the garden and they just start beginning to move it out and move it out and move it out. And they begin to work with what God has given. And all of a sudden, this sort of paradigm of things begins to explode. That's what we have embedded here. And what we have then is life, biblically speaking, isn't existence. The fact that you got up and put your clothes on today doesn't mean that you're alive, biblically speaking. Being alive means I'm related to God and to you and to this earth. And in fact, the Hebrew word that's used for the oneness of humanity is echad. And the most intimate manifestation of that is a husband and wife. A man will leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, and they shall become echad. But note, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is echad. That word is not used for numerical oneness or singularity. It's meant for an essential unity with diversity. And that defines human relationships. I just went out to Illinois, that was mentioned, my son's wedding. And one of the great bonuses was I got to be with my grandkids. And my youngest is a granddaughter, Ruby. Oh, man. I have echad with my wife of 38 years, but I have echad with Ruby. She makes me feel alive because she loves me. And that is the image that comes out of Genesis 2. Now, within this context, we have one single prohibition in all of this abundance. And the evil one gets them fixated on this one prohibition, one single prohibition. Nothing's changed. We're fat here. But we get disgruntled. Why? Because we get fixated on one thing we can't have. That's what happened in the garden. And we lost it all. It says, in the day you eat, you die. Now, I've just heard in the last 6 months, people talk about this text and say, oh yeah, but they didn't really die. And I said, wait a minute, but that's what it says. And that's because they're thinking of life in the terms of existence. They didn't, boom. Okay, but when you go to Genesis 3, what happens? They eat, and it says all of a sudden their eyes are open and they're naked. Whew. That is so significant. God comes down to hang with them. Probably his practice. And yet everything has changed today. They're hiding from him. They died to God that day. We died to God that day. And they're hiding and trying to clothe themselves. Why? Because they're naked. What does that mean? That they all of a sudden discovered they don't have any clothes on? Adam, you're naked as a jaybird. I just figured that out. No. It's this. It's like all of a sudden their eyes are opened up and they're going, whoa, don't look at me like that. What do you mean? I'm not looking at you like that. Yes, you are. No, you're not. Just go away, would you? You see? We died to one another that day. Tragically. And with that death, the thing that God gave to us, this gift, he says, I'm going to curse it now. And it's not going to be safe. It's going to have all kinds of nasties. Diseases and bugs and all kinds of natural things. And it's going to stay that way until this wound is healed. And when that wound is healed, Paul tells us in Romans 8, then the creation itself will be healed. That is our wound. That we come out of the garden with this sense of exile. So just think of it with me. We have a relationship with God, with one another, and with the earth. That is life. Those are cut. We die to those things. There's only one object left, and that's self. So my life is oriented to God, to you, and to the created order. I die to God, to you, and the created order. So now the orientation of my life is towards me. That is death. That is the death principle. That's the impulse of sin. We come out of the womb dead. We never taught our 4 children to say, mine. I don't know that any parent does. They just come out with that orientation. And you work your butt off trying to break it. No, be a sharing boy. No, mine, it's just there. And it's strong. And it works this way. It's so sad, this death. My oldest grandson, Eric, this is a number of years ago. He's probably about 4. Jack, his cousin's 3. Eric's sitting on the floor. He's playing with some toys. Eric's having a great time. These toys are just giving him all kinds of bubbly and everything. And there are a few toys over here. If he sees them, they don't matter. It's these toys. Now, his cousin Jack comes in the room. Oh, he sees these toys. He sits down playing with them. What happens to Eric? See, you all know. It's so sad. I just wish one time you wouldn't know. But you know. Eric dies. He dies too. A twofold death. He dies to the toys in front of him, and he dies to his cousin. And it doesn't have to happen. But that impulse of the curvature of self in upon the self blackmails us. It kills us. And he just says, just like that, these toys, I will not allow them to give me joy anymore until I have those. Do you see that? It's over. But the problem is his cousin has the same disease. And so Jack isn't going to go, oh, sure, Eric, have him. No, he says, bugger off, you idiot. And there's a war. And I'm separating them. Do you see? You laugh, but we do it. We do. You may have done it today to yourself. We died that day in Genesis. And Tolkien and Lewis understood that. Chesterton understood that. And they replayed it in their fiction. Go back and read their stuff. You'll see it. They understood this. Lewis probably spoke best about it in his sermon, The Weight of Glory, where he talks about how we pine to find some answer from here, some answer from here. We long. The whole history of the human race has been trying to get back to God, trying in a sense to heal this wound, trying in a sense to get nature whacked so it won't whack us. We long for it. I was this long hair hippie goofball in Oregon, and man, in the 60s, everybody was trying to get back to the garden. Everybody was. Crosby, Stills, and Nash were singing about it. Everybody. It just is there. And it's in every culture. We're trying to heal the wound. And it is the most important, the deepest thing, the truest thing about us. We long for a Chad. So here's our hell. Here's our dilemma. We were made for God, so we can't live without God, but we can't live with God. We were made for one another. And we want to live with one another, but we can't live with one another. We were made for the earth. We can't live without it, but we can't live with it too. In a sense, we can't let it be. We've got to get it whacked. Thoreau. Nope, this ain't any good. I'll go out to Walden Pond. I'm not ready to put a gun to my head. It's not benign. It's got its issues too, but at least it's safer. Within a mile of this campus, you have lonely, lonely people. And the reason they haven't put a gun to their head is they probably got a dog or cat. And you laugh, but it's true. We have to have something responding to us. It's the deepest thing about us. And when I finally came to grips with this, folks, my whole life changed. I began taking off the mask. And when I said this morning that I'm just a little hobbit of a man, I realized that's really what I am. And I really mean it. When I walked out and you're all here, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, why'd they all come here to me? Man, it makes me feel good. I'm sorry, it does. Well, no, I'm not sorry. I want to be loved, don't you? Christ has come and he has healed the wound. And he's done it from without. He's come into our story, taken up our stuff. In fact, Lewis probably says it as well as anybody. In the Christian story, God descends to reascend. He comes down to the very seabed of the nature he has created, but he goes down to come up again and bring the whole ruined world up with him. That's mythic. That's our story. On that cross, the God-man reaches out with one hand and reaches out to all of humanity with his human arm. And with his divine arm, he reaches out to God and he brings them together. And he heals the wound. And as we move into Christ, we too can begin to experience the healing of that wound. And that world out there needs to see that, folks. We're mythic creatures. You have been touched with a divine touch of healing. And as I said this morning, the world doesn't expect perfection. But we sang up here, selfless, this new generation. I pray for that. to break the curvature of self in upon the self, and to move out, to forgive, to be like Christ, magnanimous, and to show the world that we can hang together. As dysfunctional and goofy as we all are, the point is we don't take our ball and go home. We declare to the world that indeed we've been visited by the one the world has always longed for. The sent one has come, and he dwells in our midst. And the only way the world, Jesus says, will know that he's the sent one is the way we live. And that is oneness, he says, in his high priestly prayer.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.